Hello, beautiful people. My name is Emma.
And I'm MC.
And we are your hosts of the G-Forces podcast. So today we are getting ready for the Chinese Grand Prix. Hasn't happened in a few years. The track does not look very promising for my favorite team. So it should be an interesting weekend. We're not going to watch this one live.
Yeah, no, watching it live is near impossible for us.
Yeah, it
just
is not in the cards for us.
I'm excited. I know that there are kind of mixed opinions on this. I think the track is just, it's not everyone's favorite, but it's the first time it's happened in a few years, so I think it's going to be really cool. I think, yeah.
It's something different that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, I was like, it's the first, one from last season that wasn't on the schedule, so it'll be interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have, opinions about it, because I feel like so many people have made their opinions known that I'm like, okay, let's see how it is.
It's the curly section
That's so
of
weird.
The track that I don't think I've ever seen before in another track. But again, this also has happened before.
Do you know if Zhou has
raced on it before?
In F1 at it before?
No. So that's a thing. The last race happened in 2019. I believe that Zhou started in 2021 was his first year.
I'm curious, too, to see that, because I think a big, not issue, but a big comment that people say is that it seems to be a quieter crowd. It's not as many people turn out for it.
Well, yeah, that's actually something that I was going to talk about later on, but we can just quickly discuss it.
We can wait for later.
Okay. Well, yeah, so we'll talk about that later. This is going to be a little bit of a different, get ready episode than we normally do. Normally we have, a driver that we talk about, and then I will either go over a part of the week or now recently, a past race at this track. But Mary Catherine is doing a team principal.
Yeah, so one of our earlier episodes of this season, we spoke about going over the team principals and kind of their, career backgrounds, their career highlights. And we haven't done that since we did Fred, the team principal for Ferrari. So with all the news regarding Aston Martin just signing Fernando Alonso, I figured let's talk about the Aston Martin team principal, because I wanted to do a deep dive on, you guys know how I like my historical figures, but I'm pretty sure Zhou is the first Chinese Formula One driver.
Potentially.
I'd have to double check that, but yeah, historically wise, there's just not as much and I think
and the first race was in 2004, so it's not like we're gonna go that far back into history to find a driver, because even the races that I was looking at, I know the names of all the drivers.
Well, and that's the thing.
Of them.
It's not, I don't want to say it's the same issue, because it's not an issue. It's just kind of the same occurrence we have with a course like Abu Dhabi, the newer courses, or the courses that have only been around for 20 years. There's just not as much has happened.
Yeah.
And then, not every single, as I'm sure, some people listening know, not every single nation has even had F1 involvement. So sometimes it does become a little harder to highlight, for every F1 weekend. So that's why we wanted to kind of pivot and throw in a team principal, make it interesting. Which, honestly, you can kind of tell how the sport has slowly grown in popularity and has only, bursted in the last, 3-4 years. Because, I don't know, I think about, American sports and just, kind of, the stats and the backgrounds that these teams and their websites have about their, head coaches. And I guess, I don't know, Aston Martin didn't have, any info
Just
on their
surprising,
website.
because they're probably the best team when it comes to social media and content and stuff like that.
I'm just I'm surprised, especially with how prominent all of them, including, like, the pit crew, the mechanics, have gotten. I'm surprised that they don't have, like...
I would love, like, bios or even,
Yeah.
like, you know what would be really cute? I think it would be really cute if you had, like, you know how, like, in baseball you have, like, baseball trading cards? Like, I think F1 trading cards would be so freaking cute.
Well, and the way people took, like, the Delta trading cards.
Exactly. Like, F1 trading cards, and you could even have, like, the mechanics involved. Like, they would be on the trading cards, too. And we have, like, little bios on them, because we don't know anything about some of them.
It's also that's such an easy thing to carry around and walk around with and get people to sign, as opposed to, like, all of the different merch. And that's probably, like, such an... Yeah.
Well, and, I mean, there are, like, driver cards, but you have to write the teams and, like, send it to their, like, factories and, like, tell them, like, why you should get this and, like, why it should be signed or whatever.
Why have we not done this?
Because you have to pay for the postage overseas.
Oh.
I do have international stamps, which is, they're,
it's
like $1.
$7?
No, like an international stamp is, like $1. It's really not that expensive. I just didn't want to spend the money on it. I have a whole set of them, but it's for my lifetime, not for F1.
Oh,
maybe, we'll see.
You have, like... We live 12 minutes from the post. Anyways.
I know.
But yeah, so the whole point was that I feel like the bios and the backgrounds of some of the more, like, executive and more technical people, you can definitely tell are not built out.
Yeah.
Just, like, you can tell it over the last 5 years, it's just grown, and everyone, I mean, we hear, you know, F1 TV talk about, like, they can't believe mechanics are being stopped these days. So, not a ton of info on the Aston Martin team principal, but we'll get into that right now, maybe.
Let me explain what I'm gonna do first. But yeah, to sum up Mary Catherine's whole situation, F1, you should make some trading cards, not just driver cards. Those are great, but trading cards would be phenomenal. Mm-hmm. And we can make friendship bracelets to go along with them.
Yeah.
Anyways. So like I said, the race at this track has only been around since 2004, really, and I was doing some research to figure out if there was an old race I could go over, and the majority of them did not seem crazy. Like, usually at some of these, like at the Japanese Grand Prix in Suzuka, like, you have a bunch of crazy races, like in,
crazy action.
Yeah, like in Silverstone, like, you've got a lot going on. Like, you have decades of history to go along with it. This one, not so much. Some people were saying that the 2012 Grand Prix was kind of exciting. I watched some highlights on it, and in my opinion, it was just your average F1 race, honestly. I think if we were to watch it nowadays, people would be like, oh, it's a boring race. So I do have to say, people need to stop saying that F1 is boring now, because that race 12 years ago was essentially the same thing that we see today. But I'm going to go over some cool facts about the Chinese Grand Prix. And then we're going to talk about some news that's going on in the F1 world. Well, motorsport world, not just F1, actually. There's some IndyCar stuff going on, so, yeah.
Cool.
Now we can get into
Sorry to
my Krack.
Steamroll you. Yeah. Okay, so like we've said over the last, 5 minutes, the team principal of the week is Aston Martin's team principal, Mike Krack. So basically, the only information they have prior to 1998 was Mike Krack was born March 18th, 1972 in Luxembourg. I really hope that date is correct, because that'd be really funny if, the internet just did not have that right. So the first mention of Krack that I could find, there's not a lot of, like, who is he? There's not a lot of exposés.
I think it's pretty quiet.
I feel like a few of them are really, like, on the quieter, like, they're just there to do the work. But I also think you start to realize that a lot of them come from, like, engineering backgrounds, so they're just, like, the guys who have been tinkering on the car and whatnot. So the first mention of Krack is that he entered the motorsport world in 1998, where he was a test engineer for BMW. So one thing to mention is that Mike has a pretty close relationship with BMW throughout most of his career. In 2001, he did leave BMW and join the engineering team over at Sauber. And online, it mentioned that his first role at Sauber was as data analyst engineer. And again, something I mentioned the first time that we went over this, I like to just kind of see where they started, to see like, okay, he was a data analyst engineer. Now, did he come in and be the lead of teams? I don't know. Like, I don't know if he started on the lowest engineering role.
The title of data analyst engineer basically sounds like my job, but in F1.
Yeah. So he was there until the end of 2003. Well, he was there longer. He was in that role until 2003, where he was promoted, and he actually became Felipe Massa's race engineer.
Yeah, Massa.
So he was in that role, and then around 2006, Sauber became BMW Sauber, and Krack was given the chief engineering role. So slowly climbing up the ladder. I also think it's really interesting too, because there are some race engineers that have become big personalities in the F1 world.
Yeah.
I mean, think of GP, Max's engineer, and it's really interesting to kind of see. Like, okay, Mike Krack was in this role, 18 years ago. It's like, where is GP going to be in 15 years?
Oh, 100%.
So it's also kind of cool to see their background, to kind of, like, see the people currently involved or in similar roles and be like, how is this sport going to evolve? In the 2007 season, Sebastian Vettel was a test and reserve driver for BMW Sauber. So Mike Krack and Seb did work together in that role. And then Krack ended up leaving the team in 2009, and it stated online that there were differences on what to focus in the upcoming season. I think it was a kind of determined, like, he wanted to focus on, the fight of that year, but then I think the team kind of wanted to move past it and move on and focus on the car for, like, the next season. And so it was kind of just, like, a disagreement on what to focus on. Of course, as we always say, we weren't in the room, so we're getting this information from the internet. For the next handful of years, he jumped around. He works for both Coles and Heinz Union and High Tech, which are both two F3, or they're both two, like, European-based motorsport teams, and he was working in, like, the F3 world for both of them. Then he went back to BMW to be chief engineer for their DTM, or Deutsche Tourenwagen Masters team. The DTM is a racing series predominantly in Germany, racing modified versions of Group GT3 Grand Touring cars, so just like a different world of motorsport in Europe. He then left BMW again to work for Porsche, where he was the head of track engineering for the World Endurance Championship, so something that we've kind of mentioned here and there, and that is like a pretty predominant, I feel like World Endurance Championship, Le Mans, like a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
They kind of go in, like, the same bucket of, like, kind of what you do when you leave the F1 world, or, like, bucket list things.
Or you do it while you're in the F1 world.
Yeah. In 2014, Krack came back to BMW as a senior performance engineer, where he oversaw several different championships. So I think he was just involved in different, like, motorsport worlds for BMW. Where he stayed until in 2022, it was announced following the departure of the former team principal Otmar, which Otmar went on to go to Alpine.
And is now unemployed?
I don't know where Otmar is, but
he's always posting on Instagram.
But yeah, it was announced in 2022 that Mike Krack will be Aston Martin's new team principal, and he's still in that role today. So, not a ton of background. Like, I literally Googled, like, where did Mike Krack go to school? And there's, like, no information.
Weird.
I just think, like, again, these, like, bios aren't built out. I'm obviously not doing, like, days and days of research. So if I looked hard enough, I'm sure I could, like, if I got as investigative. But, yeah, again, like, another engineering guy coming up in the ranks. I think that's been, I mean, we've only done 2, but that's been the common theme.
Well, and they typically seem to have a relationship with drivers at a younger age. So, like, him having the relationship with Seb at a younger age, it makes sense that then Seb went to Aston Martin when Aston Martin had their first year as, like, Aston Martin.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also interesting, too, to kind of see the teams that they're involved in and their relationships. I also was impressed by the range of motorsport in which he's worked under.
Well, I think it goes to show that, like, we mostly focus on F1 here, but F1 is not all of motorsport. There's so much more going on, and so when we're like, where are these F2 drivers going to go? Like, once they're done in F2, there's so much that they can do. Their dream typically is to go to F1, but I almost think because right now of the lack of seats really available, I wouldn't be surprised within the next 5 years if there is another motorsport, whether it's IndyCar or WEC or whatever, that really blows up fan base-wise because people have really followed these F2 guys for a long time recently, and I think people are going to follow them into whatever form of motorsport they end up in.
I am curious, too, with the popularity and the amount of people that are, like, entering their kids into it, or just, like, you know, the amount of people who are, you know, just walking off the street from one motorsport and trying to join, like, the Formula world. I'm curious to see how many drivers we see go into more executive or technical roles in teams. Because I feel like there's going to be this, like, mass amount of younger drivers where it's like, yeah, there's all these other branches of motorsport, but also, like, how many of them, you know, come to the other side of the table and get
how many of them become, like, a Susie Wolf?
Yeah. So, yeah, just interesting, but that's my Krack. I did not realize he was from Luxembourg, so I thought that was interesting.
I have been wondering what his accent was. Every time I hear him speak, I'm like, I cannot figure it out.
Well, because I feel like between him and is the Alpines team principal Bruno, what's his name? I don't know. But they're like, they only speak when they're asked questions, and then no one ever asks them questions because they're always in interviews with, like, Toto or Christian, and that's where all the questions go to. So I feel like that's why we never hear them speak, is because no one asks about their team. It's like Toto, Christian, and James Voles are the only people they ask questions to. And then they joke with Fred.
Yeah, and Andrea Stella is never invited because Zach Brown goes instead.
Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty sure...
It throws me off so much.
I'm pretty sure Sauber just doesn't have team principals right now.
Yeah, I really don't understand that one,
They have, like, a team head or, like, I don't know. But anyways, we'll get to them later on in the season.
Yeah.
But, yeah, and the whole reason why I brought it up was because of the big news.
Well, that's actually going to be talked about later on in our news section, so we're not going to bring that up yet, even though you already did slip it in there. We'll talk about that in a moment. We are going to talk about some of the past facts about the Chinese Grand Prix. So we're going to get into that right now.
Cool.
Like I said at the beginning, the past Chinese Grand Prix, at least from what I can tell, nothing crazy happens. So here's just a few little fun facts about the Chinese Grand Prix. So in the early 1990s, the Chinese government actually began seeking an F1 race, and I think it was in 1996 they actually had one track built, and so then in 1999 they were on the calendar for an F1 race, but then the FIA came in and did an inspection and was like, nope, not up to code, canceled.
Oh, crap.
And so then that's when they built the Shanghai track, and that's when they were able to have the race starting in 2004. Like Mary Catherine said earlier on, this is typically considered one of the least attended races, and because of that, it's actually historically a money-losing race. But I think the reason why they apparently had it, at least during the 2000s, I think that the fee that they had to pay to F1 to have the race, which is kind of wild, that somebody has to pay to host it, was the highest fee out of all of the races.
So, like, they just charged China up the wazoo.
Yeah.
And they were like, it's too good. Like,
basically.
Even though we lose money that weekend, we're making so much more money off of their entry fee.
And apparently in 2011, there were rumors that it wasn't going to get renewed on the calendar, but then Bernie Ecclestone, who's a controversial character who I don't really know a ton about, I just know people don't like him sometimes, apparently he was like, no, those rumors are false, we're still going to have it, nothing's going to be off the calendar, whatever. But apparently this year, it's a sold-out weekend, probably because of Joe.
I think the fact that they have a hometown driver...
Changed it.
It changed it.
Yeah.
You know, I also think it's probably the...
It hasn't happened since 2019.
I was like, it's probably one of the biggest...
since then has blown up.
And it's probably, like, the biggest... I mean, I don't know the course, so, like, if there are other events happening, don't quote me, but it's really, like, the biggest event it's had since 2019. If it's had anything.
Yeah, apparently they only use it once a year for the F1 race, really. So it is an extremely dirty track, like really filthy, because it just hasn't been used really in 5 years. So I'll get to that a bit later. Here are some cool, like, fun things that have happened there. So, in 2006, the Chinese Grand Prix was actually Michael Schumacher's last F1 victory.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, it's been a minute. And then in 2019, the Chinese Grand Prix was actually the 1,000th round of the F1 World Championship ever.
I feel like it adds up.
It definitely adds up over the years. Okay, so one of the races that people were telling me to look at, like I said before, was the 2012 Grand Prix. And that year in racing was kind of a wild year because you have Kimi Räikkönen, you have a young Lewis Hamilton, you have Sebastian Vettel, Jenson Button, Mark Webber, Michael Schumacher, Nico Rosberg, a young Daniel Ricciardo, and a really shitty Toro Rosso, which apparently was so bad.
Emma, where were you in 2012?
Middle school. I was in middle school.
Okay.
Yeah, probably. As they're racing in, like, Monaco, I'm taking my state exams.
Love the ELAs.
Anyways.
Shout out Regents.
Yeah. So 2011 was one of the years that Sebastian Vettel had won the World Drivers' Championship. I don't remember who won in 2012. Maybe it was Seb. Can't remember. Probably should have looked that up, but I didn't because it didn't really matter
don't have
at
it
the end.
memorized yet.
That seems like a hard thing to remember. So the 2012 Grand Prix, as I'm watching it, I'm watching the highlights. It was essentially your typical tire race. It was, you get off the start, manage your tires, it's a pit stop strategy race where, like, if you do a 2-stop, you might be ahead. If you do a 3-stop, you might be ahead, just depending on if you can hold your tires long enough. And yeah, there were, like, overtakes and stuff, but it wasn't anything crazy. And at this point, there were more than 20 cars on the grid. I think there were, like, 23 or something like that.
Okay.
So the top 17 cars move on to Q2 in qualifying, which was really weird for me to read. Yeah. So the 2012 Grand Prix was actually Nico Rosberg's first win in F1, and it was his first race win since leaving GP2 6 years before.
Wow.
It was the first Mercedes win since the 1955 Italian Grand Prix, because I guess in 1955 Mercedes did have a team, and then they stopped for, I think it was something like 50-something seasons, and so this was the first time that they had won a race since 1955.
Wow.
And it is the first time a German driver won a Grand Prix in a German-built car in F1, which is pretty cool. And both drivers at the time for Mercedes were German, because Michael Schumacher was also racing for Mercedes. And, I mean, his Mercedes years, Michael Schumacher, are not known to be, like, his prime years. I think it was more he came back as a favor and as something to do, and so, yeah, he, at that point, this was the last season that he was on that team, because then in 2013, that's when Lewis is on Mercedes. And Lewis and Nico were teammates for 3 years, I believe. 2013, 4 years maybe. Because 2016 was the year that I think that Nico won the World Drivers' Championship and then retired afterwards. But it was interesting to read about it because I'm like, wow, some of these people really have been here for so long. Like, Checo was on the grid at this point. Yeah.
2012?
Yeah.
How long has Checo been on the grid?
This might have been his, he was racing for Sauber at that point. This might have been his first season or whatever, or his, second season.
He's been on the grid as long as Lewis?
No, because Lewis started in, 2007.
Oh, true.
Where Checo and Danny's, a year older than Checo. So Checo and
forget
Danny might have started in, 2011, 2012.
I forget that Danny's been on the grid for so long.
Well, and that's why people are like, Danny, it might be time to retire.
Yeah, but also look at the other side of, Fernando.
But look at Fernando's results, though.
Yeah.
It's a little different. Well, and I was reading an article today, and Fernando was like, I'll be the first one to raise my hand if I'm not doing well anymore. I'll be the first one to say it. And I believe he would be the first one to say it.
Well, I think that's, kind of the biggest issue that I feel like a lot of athletes feel as they age out of their sport. And I'm not saying that Danny's aging out, just conversation.
Don't come for us, people.
Don't come for us. Trust me, Danny does not look old. But I feel like it's kind of that whole effect of, when is it time to, be done. When is it time to close the next chapter?
Well, because for so many years, I mean, when you think about it, all of these guys have been at least karting since they were 5, 6 years old. And then they've gotten to F1 and they've been here for so many years. This has been their life, their whole life. They've never known anything without being a race car driver of some sort.
And I think there's they're probably always, they're all chasing the driver's championship dream.
All the time.
Now, how close are they? That's a whole different argument, but I think it's this, I wouldn't be surprised if, Danny and Lewis and all of them are, in this mindset of, one more year and I can win it. Just one more year, and it'll be, and I think it's, I don't want to say it's sad, because I think they're just chasing the dream, the only dream to have.
They're still physically fit enough
F1,
to do it.
and that's the thing, they can physically still do it, but I think it's that moment, kind of the same feeling we had about, the Spain national team, where it's when has it been a little too long? You know? Yeah. When, and again, you never want to end it on, an injury, or
a bad bad season.
But I don't know. It's really hard to say because, we both had to leave our sport for personal reasons, but we weren't in it for the length of time that these guys are in it.
Yeah.
And we weren't at a level anywhere near this.
Yeah. And it was difficult for us, so I can't even imagine how hard it is for them, but,
it was difficult for us knowing we're not going professional. We knew in college, we're doing 4 years.
It's just interesting because you have people like Lewis and Danny who just keep going. And then you have people like Nico Rosberg who, after their first win of the championship, it's I did it. I achieved the dream. Time to leave now.
I think, too, it becomes who wants it. Did Nico want it, or was it just something that, okay, I achieved what you wanted me to achieve. It's I
think he probably wanted it.
Oh, I'm sure that when you're in it that long, but it's also maybe it was just okay, but then at that point,
you're
done.
At your you've reached the point of I've been chasing this dream and this goal for so long and I've achieved it now. Why keep going sometimes? What are you gonna gain from winning another one sometimes?
Well, I think that's kind of the conversation and the question everyone has about, Red Bull. That's, you've achieved the impossible. Now, what's next?
Yeah, clean sweep. That's what their goal is, probably. Yeah,
but
so,
anyways.
Those were my fun facts about the Chinese Grand Prix. Again, there's not really much to talk about for them. Now we're going to get into some things that are going on in the motorsport world. Okay, so apparently the Shanghai track is known to be a very bumpy track, so a lot of people are really stressed out about it because, like we've said, the last race they had was in 2019. The cars have changed quite a lot since then. The cars are way more sensitive to bumps in the road, and they're much lower to the ground.
Dude, they're gonna come
and like
out of it
like the bumping that people experience.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have that in like 2019, really, at least like severely. And so apparently the FIA went and inspected it, and they had to fix some issues, but there's still some worries because this is the first sprint weekend of the year. It's a track that several people have never raced on before. It's a track that hasn't really been raced on in 5 years. They've never experienced driving on this track in this generation of cars.
If they could do Vegas, they can do this. Like,
Yeah.
we went into Vegas very much, like,
I'm just expressing
Yeah.
everyone's stresses.
Yeah.
Well, and with it being the sprint weekend, just a reminder, the sprint format has changed this year. So in the past, it would be practice session, and then it would be full-on race qualifying, and then on Saturday, it would be sprint qualifying and the sprint in the afternoon, and then Sunday, it would be the race.
So, like, for me, and I'm with everyone, why would you choose this weekend for the first sprint format? Why would you have not chosen Australia or Japan? Because I just feel like if you know, and granted, it is sold out, so I think it's going to be a different weekend, but if you know statistically that this is a race course that you struggle to get people to every year, why would you have all of the extra things? And maybe it was their whole way to get people to come, like, oh, it's the first sprint weekend. But why would you not have a sprint weekend in Australia or Japan where there's
Maybe it was
so
because
many people?
They historically don't have a lot of people at this race, so if it's a shit show, not everyone's going to see.
Everyone around the world is going to see.
I know. Anyways.
Like,
The new format this year is going to be practice session 1 on Friday, and the afternoon is going to be sprint qualifying on Friday, and then Saturday morning is going to be the actual sprint race, and then Saturday afternoon is going to be qualifying for the actual race. So they have to qualify for the actual race after spending 45 minutes doing a sprint.
what was the old format? What was last season?
Hold on, let me finish.
Sorry.
And then obviously Sunday is the normal full-on race. So like I said, practice, sprint quali, race. Last year was practice, quali, sprint, race. So you would do qualifying for the full-on race on Friday, and then you would do sprint quali on Saturday morning, and then you'd have the sprint race on Saturday afternoon.
I mean, people are already complaining about it. Like, everyone's been complaining
I think it's
about
going
it.
to be interesting to see how people qualify when they're exhausted from a sprint, but I also worry that people are not going, like, the drivers are not going to try for the sprint because, first of all, the points are not really a big thing. It doesn't really mean much. And then at the end of the day, wouldn't they rather conserve their energy for the actual race and race qualifying?
It also, the layout completely screws up. I mean, no one's going to try in the sprint because if you destroy your car in the sprint,
if you crash in the sprint, you don't qualify for it. You can't do qualifying for the race.
9 times out of 10, you're going to be starting from the pit lane.
I think that we should go back to the sprint format that they had a couple years ago, where you would have your qualifying, you'd have practice, you'd have qualifying, and then you'd have your sprint race. And then where you ended in the sprint race was basically where you were going to start for the actual race. The sprint race was your qualifying for the actual race.
Yeah, I think, like, out of anything, that probably makes the most amount of sense. Like,
because then it means something.
Well, I know we've talked about the reverse grid, but I feel like the reverse grid is just kind of like a Mario Kart level. Like, it's something that we would love to see. Like, I would love to see a reverse grid, but I don't think, like, logistically they would ever do it.
I think the start would be actual, like, crashes.
I just feel like they've kind of...
Now I understand why the drivers are like, this is just another thing you have to do.
I personally don't mind sprint weekends because, I mean, I always want more, like, racing because, I mean, it takes so much to put a race on. But I also, like, understand why people don't care about the sprints at all.
Yeah.
Is because they've screwed around with the format. They've never figured it out. It's only within 6 weekends. And honestly, it's the weirdest weekends that they choose. Like, I feel like they've never hit, like...
Yeah.
They've never hit the mark. They've had every opportunity, but, like, I don't know. Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah. It is what it is.
Well, back to the Shanghai track, actually. The reason why it's known to be bumpy is because it was actually built on swampland.
I mean, I'm sure it's not the first. It's not even the first on the friggin' weekend that's been built and not the greatest location.
Yeah, that's true.
You know.
Like Mary Catlin has stated before, Fernando Alonso has re-signed with Aston Martin for the 2025 and 2026 seasons.
Was it confirmed it was just that? Because I've seen
with
quotes.
potential for more.
I think...
Let me finish, MC. This is my news segment.
Condescending tone.
Apparently Aston Martin has discussed the potential for Alonso to become like a Niki Lauda for Aston. So I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of 2026 he just becomes Niki of Aston, which would be cool. But the one thing that's really interesting is Lance Stroll has not been confirmed as for re-signing for next year. So right now Lance Stroll doesn't have a seat technically.
Did you see the graphic that F1 posted on Instagram of, like, all the teams and the seats that have been confirmed?
Yeah.
And Max was a seat. Is Max confirmed for next year?
Max has been confirmed through 2028.
So then what the frick was everyone talking? Was it just him?
Because Lewis ended his contract early,
Okay.
and so people are like, there could be that in other people's contracts where they can end it early.
Okay, so to make that clear for those that are probably newer to the world, Max is confirmed. So yeah, only 4 seats.
He could technically break it if it's in his contract. He can technically break it.
No, 5. So 6 seats are confirmed so far.
Both
so
McLaren.
Both McLaren. We have Lewis. We have Charles. We have Fernando.
Max.
George
is still there. Alex is still there, technically, for one more season after this. Who else?
I feel like seeing Fernando re-sign with Aston Martin just kind of confirmed that nothing really crazy is going to happen this silly season.
Well, I think that just means that Carlos is going to end up at Mercedes. I don't think Kimi Antonelli is ready for F1, and I don't think they would want to put him in too early, so I could see that, like, I could see Carlos going to Mercedes for a year and then going to Audi the next year.
Well, because I feel like this season is, like, it's going to be, like, a lot of, like, one season, because I think next year, because, again, the 2026 regulations are changing.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a big toss-up, but...
Yeah.
Again, it's still early.
Yeah.
But yeah, he said it was... he had a few quotes stating it was, like, the longest contract he's ever signed in his life.
Because he's jumped around to teams. He also, one of the big reasons why he decided to re-sign with them was because of the relationship with Honda for 2026. Because Aston Martin's going to be using Honda power units. Yeah. So, yeah.
And he loves... I feel like he loves anything Japan.
Yeah. Another thing that's happened over the last, like, week and a half, 2 weeks, Andretti has opened up a facility in Silverstone. They said, we don't care that you didn't let us into F1.
Yeah.
We're still going to open up a facility.
They're really, like...
I think it's kind of savage, honestly. It's funny.
It's giving the same energy as, like, tying yourself to a tree if you don't want it cut down.
Yeah, and they're going to start... They're hoping to enter teams in F2 and F3 so they can start a relationship with these drivers early on so that they can then have an F1 team eventually, which I think they will, honestly.
You know, the funny thing is, too, Andretti... is big in the IndyCar world.
Yeah.
And IndyCar has had its fair share of, like, rifts and splits. I mean, go back to that episode. It's very confusing history.
I feel like IndyCar...
I could see Andretti being like, we're going to make the drivers want us in F1, or we'll create our own F1.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
Like,
IndyCar seems kind of messy like that.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And so I just feel like all of this is Andretti being like, can you hear us in the back?
Yeah, literally. Well, and then speaking of IndyCar, Prema is going to be joining IndyCar next year, I think.
It's crazy.
So they are going to have a couple of cars in IndyCar.
Curious to know how long this has been in the works for Prema. Like, if
I think it'll be really good because we've already seen a bunch of F2 drivers go to IndyCar instead of F1. And I think that it is something that's necessary because, like we said, F1 only has so many seats. IndyCar also only has so many seats, really.
Mm-hmm.
But I think IndyCar is a bit more accessible. The tickets are cheaper than F1. IndyCar has had a lot more action, like race-wise, over the last 2 years compared to F1. I think people are getting way more into IndyCar recently than people are getting a little bored of F1 recently, so they're getting into IndyCar.
I think
having a team in IndyCar is like the smartest move for them.
I also wonder if they're seeing like I feel like you're getting this sandwich of drivers in IndyCar where you're getting these younger guys like Pato who are good enough to be in F1 but just like cannot, like, there's just not a seat for them, so they end up there.
And I mean, Pato loves IndyCar.
Oh, no doubt about that. Or they're like on the other side of the spectrum where they did like a year or two, like a few years in F1. They're kind of like settling down. Maybe they have a family. Like, I just feel like it's like, it's also just the travel. Yeah. I mean, the schedule for F1 alone is crazy internationally. I feel like IndyCar, like, I mean, I know, as a girl with tummy issues, when I travel, I'm not always the best. Like, I'm sure all those people traveling in F1, their bodies start to freak out.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I also think Prema is an older motorsport family. They have a lot of history, a really deep history. So I think it's kind of cool to see. I also think it shows you how big IndyCar has gotten and how much of like a funnel Europe is to IndyCar.
Yeah.
I think Prema being historically European, now joining an American motorsport, championship. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for Liberty Media to buy IndyCar if they don't own it already.
I hope not. Last IndyCar thing before we get back to F1 stuff. So Catherine Legge, I think I'm saying her last name correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong. She will be racing in the Indy 500. Again, I think this is her 4th time doing it. If you watch the 100 Days to Indy season last year, she has a whole segment where she's talking about like this is she really wants to try. I think she ended up crashing in the race, so she ended up not finishing it, but she'll be racing it again this year, and we're seeing another beauty sponsor like Charlotte Tilbury in F1 Academy. We are seeing e.l.f. makeup. They are sponsoring her. They are her primary sponsor for the Indy 500. It's the first time a beauty brand has been the primary sponsor for IndyCar ever.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I'm not at all.
I think they're probably seeing the data of female viewership in 100%. Motorsport. I think they're seeing, I mean, I just feel like it's more like sports and are more talked about amongst women. Like, that makes sense. Like, not that it ever wasn't, but I don't know, I also feel like makeup, like, anyone can freaking wear makeup. Like,
100%.
If we have Raising Cane's all over certain things.
And e.l.f. literally isn't just makeup, it's also, like, skincare, too.
Yeah.
Everyone needs sunscreen.
Also, those, like, makeup companies have so much money. Like, why wouldn't they sponsor? Like, the amount of advertising that they get. And
I do find it really funny that e.l.f. decided to do it, though, because e.l.f. is, like, the Charlotte Tilbury dupe for everything. And so e.l.f. is like, Charlotte Tilbury dupe, like, we're going to do IndyCar instead.
Well, I think it's interesting, too, that you have Charlotte Tilbury, which is a more expensive brand. You have e.l.f., which is, like...
Okay, I remember when e.l.f., all their products were, like, $1 or $2, and now I'm spending sometimes, like, $15 on a product. Anyways.
So,
yeah, that was really cool. Back to F1 stuff. There have been rumors that Alpine is for sale. I don't think that these rumors are true, but I figured I'd mention it anyways. I find it really strange that that is a rumor going around just because of all the investors that they've had and everything
Why?
else. Just because, like, call it quits. End it while you're behind sometimes.
I mean, it would definitely be, like, the anti-Wrexham to, like, come in, be an investor, and then, like, sell it. I think that would definitely be, but also if it's...
I don't know if it's necessarily the investors that are making the decision. Because I don't think that they have that much of an investment say, really.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with them. I don't really...
I'm a little worried about them, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't seen the end of a team or, like, a team fall apart financially or just, like, leave F1.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting, but...
Yeah.
I would hope not, especially because, like, the hope was that the money from the investors, you know, it would turn around.
Yeah.
That if they did just call it quits, that would be a bum.
Yeah.
But.
Last thing for the news, what's going on in F1 right now is McLaren has had several times, just to end it on my favorite team, they've said several times now that China is just going to be damage limitation. That their hope is to just not crash the car and to make it to the end of the race.
Yeah, but your team says that every freaking
No, but,
weekend.
like, this track does not look good for them at all.
I'll see it when I believe it. I'll believe it when I see it.
We say this
I'll
now,
see it, and
it'll
maybe
be like
I'll
Lando's
believe it.
first win.
That's what I'm...
No, I actually don't think that's going to happen, though. Like, I think it's going to be bad. Like, I
mean,
wouldn't be surprised if one of them does not finish in the points.
I don't think that this is going to be an incredible race for many.
I'm waiting for this to be, like, Nico Hülkenberg's, like, first win or something like that.
I mean, that'd be great.
That would be insane.
The energy that that the world would give off would be great. But
yeah.
I think enough people don't know this, and the drivers that did drive on it have not been on it in so many years.
Well, because Oscar's never driven on that track. If it was in 2019, Lando drove on it his first year, and that was it.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if it's going to be... I think it's going to be a mixed bag. I think probably Max will be on top, because that's just what happens. But I wouldn't be surprised if the rest is just, like, a random. Yeah. Like, it's. I think this weekend's going to be anyone's game, or, like, the last 4 weekends, it's going to be the same thing.
Yeah. We'll have to see.
Our predictions are the same every weekend. It's going to be crazy, or it's not, and then it never is. Unfortunately.
Yeah, I do think it'll probably be your average race.
Yeah.
Max will get out ahead, and that'll be that.
Yeah. I am excited to see, you know...
A different environment.
A different environment, you know. I like to see, you know, the local crowds that come out.
I know. I'm very excited to see what the crowd is like.
Yeah, especially because Australia is, I mean, it gives off its own energy. Japan is just, you know...
The hats are
So I'm curious, like,
You've
China...
got your Dutch fans that are, like, dancing around, doing, like, the conga line, having a great time.
What is China going to bring?
I have no idea. I'm really curious, actually.
Yeah. But...
All right. Well, I think that's the end of today's episode. Just make sure to take a look at the times for the actual race weekend because it's going to be a little wacky again.
Yeah, if you're in the States, it's at night. It's mostly night. So we'll probably, what we can stay up for, you know, that's later in the evening, we'll stay up for, but anything that's, like, between 2 and 3 a.m. Central Time.
Or even, like, after midnight, honestly, at this point. I'm getting a little old to stay up past midnight.
How old are you?
I'm 25.
All right, on that note, we're going to end it there, because it's Emma's bedtime.
All right, bye, guys.
Bye.